Yeah, this is awesome. Oh, I guess we should get kicking, right? All right, everybody. Hey, bienvenidos. I'm going to bet this subject will be expansive. And so we really want to launch into this. Hey, you're welcome, Gabriela. So I'm Armando Enrique Zumaya, as I've been called recently. I'm the founder of Somos the first Latinx fundraising institute in the country. And as you know, a lot of you are members, but if you're not a member, you should join. If you're a Latino in philanthropy and fundraising, all we do is teach fundraising. That is our expertise and our sweet spot. We believe in the power of our own people to solve their own problems and raise our own resources to power our own movements and organizations. Okay, that's what we're about. So we do three things. We train Latino fundraisers wherever you work. We support Latinx focused organizations. That's our number one task. And we also bring more Latinos into the fundraising industry and what we're doing. So I've been in a unique position for the past 2 years as a founder. I've been literally talking to hundreds of Latino leaders across the country. So very few people get to do this. There's no association of Latino nonprofits where everyone gets in one room and talks. Doesn't happen. And so what's a trip is talking to Latino leaders in major organizations, and you hear internalized racism from them. You hear generalizations, racist stuff from Latinos about ourselves, self-defeating myths. And as you'll hear later, also to our own internal junk, guys, racism, tú eres negro, tú eres blanco, you're from, Guadalajara, I'm from the, whatever, you're from Puerto Rico, I'm from whatever. We love to divide ourselves. And so it's a barrier to our success and our strength and our unity, to our individual strength in our own job, that we believe. I've heard Latino leaders say, oh, our people don't give. Our people aren't philanthropic. And I asked them, are you a fundraiser? Did you done this for a living? You've been trained? Well, no. Then how can you talk about fundraising if that's not your, I don't talk about brain surgery because I don't know anything about it, But this is a very, very common thing, is to hear people say, this is the way Latinos are around giving money, philanthropy. And a lot of it is pura mentiras. So we need to see it in ourselves, see it in organizations, and break it. So I've got the dream team, the Golden State Warriors of panels. I'm from Northern California, so I can say that. For you guys today, we have Gemma Cantu, who's a brand new graduate of La Vanguardia, our fundraising program, and she's newer to the profession. She's very outspoken. That's why she's on this panel. She's never been on the shy bus for 2 seconds in her life. And so that's why we got her here. We also have Pedro Rivera, who's an early and first founding board member of Somos el Poder. He's a development officer at George Mason University, worked for Unidos US, and is just a dynamite, nationally known fundraiser and a great guy too. And finally, we're super lucky to have Professor Laura Padilla with us from Southwestern Law School, way down in San Diego land, California Western, excuse me, I messed that up, right? All right, so anyway, when I started studying who's talking about Latino internalized racism, I found her, and her writings blew me away. They were like she had been taking notes on my life, okay? And she'd been seeing what I've been seeing. So it was direct verification of my anecdotal experience from her work. So we're gonna let the panel take it over. I'm gonna ask them some questions, but here, guys, I've got 5 questions. You start loading them up in the chat box, and I will select them and we will ask them. But first, let's let Professor Padilla talk to us about what is the monster we're talking about? What does it look like? How do we see it? And give some definition to it. Please, Professor Padilla.
Thank you so much. And thank you for organizing this panel, for including me in this conversation, because it is a really important conversation. We don't talk nearly enough about it. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. I'm seeing 47 participants, and at least on the West Coast, it's still early, it's storming. You're at your computers, and thank you for giving some of your time to us today. So I'll start with just a little bit of a conversation or discussion about what internalized oppression is. And in its simplest terms, internalized oppression happens when members of sideline communities, whether we're Latino, Black, Asian, LGBTQIA, whatever it is, sideline community members believe negative stereotypes about themselves. So where does it start? Internalized oppression actually starts externally. And you've got oppressors who start the chain of oppression through racist behavior, through discriminatory behavior. And it could range from the extreme of physical violence prompted by someone's race to race-based exclusion, derogatory race-based name calling, and stereotyping. So in the context of this webinar, for example, somebody might say something like, why fundraise from Latinas or Latinos? They're lazy, they don't have any money anyway. Maybe not that overt, but something along those lines. And then oppressors try to capitalize on fears created by the stereotypes that causes more oppressive behavior. So it starts on the outside, people engaging in discriminatory racist behavior, and then we internalize it when we experience that oppressive behavior, and we start to believe it. And it can cause psychological harm, physical harm over time. As we internalize those stereotypes and we act on it, we act on these negative perceptions about ourselves, about other members of our own group. So when I think about how it manifests generally, well, that really is more how it manifests generally, where it begins and how we internalize it. And then for sideline communities generally, there's certain common patterns, but then we have specific patterns based on our own communities. So if we think about the Latino community, the Latina community, to particularize it, we need to think about the stereotypes that we hear. So you can sort of fill in the blank, and it's complex, and we don't have time to get into all the nuance because everyone sort of experiences it individually, and depending on the ethnic group, Mexican, Latino, Cubano, Central American, South American, we've got different sorts of stereotypes. But even across the board, Latinos share a unique experience of oppression and survival in the US. For example, Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, and this is from a quote, who constitute the largest and oldest Latino communities within the official US borders, were attacked, invaded, colonized, annexed, exploited by the US. So we've got this deep-rooted discriminatory behavior. And again, quoting, after the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, people of Mexican origin faced lynchings, land theft. My peeps are from New Mexico, so I know, firsthand about the land theft, virulent racism. Later, in times of economic depression, people of Mexican origin, citizens and non-citizens alike, are deported en masse. As a result, many Mexican origin people internalize the racism and learned to despise all things Mexican. Despising all things native to ourselves causes unhealthy behavior, including self-loathing and perpetuating negative stereotypes. And I'm embarrassed to share this story, but growing up, I remember my mom and her girlfriends talking and just bragging about how weta their grandkids were. And I'm like, really? At the time I was young, I didn't really think anything of it. But as I got older and had kids and heard my mom and her girlfriend still using that language, I'm like, no, not okay. We are not judging our grandkids based on how white or not white they are, but it still happens. So we can be conditioned to believe these things. You hear them long enough, you start to believe them. In California, over the years, we've had different legislation that, for example, getting rid of affirmative action. And you'd be stunned at the number of Latinos that vote for this. And that's sort of a manifestation of internalized racism. And then believing that immigrants take our jobs away from us, because that's what the oppressors tell us. And as we well know, these are jobs that a lot of people just don't want, right? And there's more to it than that. We might refrain from using Spanish in a professional setting because it will betray our heritage. Yeah, I already mentioned believing that whiter is better. So that's just sort of a general background on both what it is, how it manifests. And I know later on we're going to talk about solutions or ways to move away from it. So I'm not going to go there yet. And I know this is a little off script, Armando, so don't hate me, but I'm curious about specific negative stereotypes about Latinas or Latinos that permeate the fundraising and philanthropic world. Since I'm in the law professor world, I'm not sure if there's specific ones that you all deal with on the regular.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Padilla. It's I'll give you two examples. In my own family, my former family, I used to be married, they would say to my wife, who was from Guadalajara, very light, you would even say pale. Oh, él tiene sangre indio. He's, watch out for him. He's a northerner. He's from the, they're dark. And I talked to an ED in Philadelphia. This was 2 years ago, who was from a South American country. And she said to me, all I got here is Puerto Ricans. Like that. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I got to deal with these people. She said, they're just so disorganized. And so I was like, whoa, okay, do they know you feel that way about them? So, and I've heard that from Mexicans saying that about Mexicans, and Latinos saying that about each other. So that's something we got to break that up. I do want to point out a colleague here from Lida Ramos, who's a partner of Somos. So check out Lida Ramos. Let's ask the first question. I'm going to start with Gemma and then go to Pedro and then back to Professor Padilla. Tell us about how you've seen internalized racism manifest itself in your profession, in your area, in your experience.
Yes, thank you for that question. Hi, everyone. Buenos dias. My name is Gemma Cantu. I'm grateful to be in community with you all. And thank you, Armando, for inviting me to this important conversation. The work that you do for our people is truly incredible. And I really hope that this conversation is the first of many, because we really need it. Dr. Padilla and Pedro Rivera, it's truly a privilege to be in a panel discussion with you. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced some form of internalized oppression. So if I have permission from all of you to allow me to share my experience in hopes that we can all find commonalities and hopefully move this conversation towards a powerful discussion for our gente and movements. And for me as a fundraiser, internalized racism really started when I realized that my path on how I got into the nonprofit sector or fundraising space was quite different from other development professionals who went to school and got their degree in nonprofit management or in philanthropy. I really started to cut my teeth in fundraising when I became a canvasser for a nonprofit and in 2016. And one of the very first things that we were trained on was how to ask people from our community to donate $100 a month to our programs. If you come from a low income family background like me, you will quickly realize that asking for money, let alone $100 a month from a complete stranger, was just completely out of the question. We don't do that. Sometimes I wouldn't even ask for $100 a month. Sometimes I would just ask the person to just donate because I was just so shy in asking people for money. So it's been taking me years of real life nonprofit work experience, training, and professional development to really change my relationship with money and how I really saw myself in this sector. And in my family, money or how to handle money was never a conversation. So by doing this work, I am constantly confronted with imposter syndrome. And it's been a constant deconstruction and reconstruction of dismantling my own narratives. And that's not been easy, internally and externally. to really be in this sector and to be a fundraiser, as a Latina woman, you have to have ganas, you have to have confidence, you have to have attitude, and you have to know why you're here. But most importantly, know that you bring value to this space. And I think that's been my biggest journey throughout my entire career, is just finding value and also claiming this space as my own. Because for a very long time, I didn't see myself as a fundraiser. I didn't see myself as a leader. But by doing this work, you really have to find the confidence within, and also the support from your community, to make sure that you are being really supported, because you are needed here. So.
Wonderful. Gracias. Pedro, please.
I think when it comes to internalized racism, I think I've manifested it in several of my professions. I started my career as an attorney, and I can tell you that every place that I worked, I was one of 3 or one of 2 attorneys. I worked in a large international law firm in a major city, and I remember that the few Latinos that we were there, there's always that question whether we belong there or not. And then we were sometimes, I think, in many ways viewed as the super Latinos, because we had to be meaner, leaner, and greener. And I don't think that kind of internalized racism of being worthy of being there was something that I thought my white compatriots were feeling at the same time. I think, interesting enough, I've worked in large Latino organizations, and the internalized racism is a little different, and it becomes more of like, I don't know, I think it touches the issues of colorism, as like, you're a light-skinned Latino, or you were whether or not race privilege, or you're not, Puerto Ricans, we're not immigrants, we're born U.S. citizens. So I think sometimes I have felt the sense of resentment of that background, I always thought it interesting that working in a Latino organization, I thought we were all one and one for all, and kind of immediately came to the realization that even within our own people, unfortunately, some of them feel better than others, or better improved, or you don't understand la lucha, or you're not the son of a migrant son, or I've been told, like, you weren't born and raised in the barrio, what do you understand about the struggles of Latinos? And I find that offensive, because I don't think that you necessarily need to be born and raised in the barrio to understand that. And and also just making assumptions of the fact that I was a lighter skinned, highly educated, that my parents went to college, and so I've had it from the side of the Latino company, working in a Latino organization, and then working in a predominantly white male dominated organization. And it's always you always have to feel like someone is judging you, or feeling that every move you make. I can remember working in a large law firm. If something were to happen in our writing had to be it had to be perfect, almost, like there was no room for error, because if you wrote something wrong, you would be like, you see, we give these guys the opportunity and they mess up their writing skills, or they would use that as an excuse. And as many of us know, your writing skills are really up to we all write in different ways, and it's not necessarily whether it's whether you like it or not, because sometimes grammatically it's correct. You don't go to 7 years of higher education and write poorly, at least I hope not. But anyway, so it's kind of interesting of those assumptions that you felt like, am I writing well enough? Am I expressing well enough? Or, even sometimes, I've had situations, I remember a higher level partner saying to me that I spoke English well for Puerto Rican, and to that offense, I said to him, well, my parents paid a lot of money on my education, and I think he felt offended that I felt offended, and it was just like, why do you assume that we have the same level of education? You would never say that to someone from the South who has a Southern accent, or someone from so. It's been an interesting profession, and on my legal career, my fundraising career, and then I also worked in wealth management. And in wealth management, I was always one of 2 of Latinos working with people of ultra high net worth. So that's been kind of my own personal experience.
Gracias, Pedro. And Professor Padilla, if you can talk about your academic background and what you've seen, and what you're hearing from these nice folks parallels to what you've studied, please.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Hema and Pedro, for sharing your stories. So mine, I think the first conscious internalized oppression moment I had was my freshman year at Stanford, which I had to wonder, growing up in the shadow of East LA, going from there to Stanford was just a mind-blowing, complete world-changing experience, and mostly in a very positive way. And I'm very Pollyanna-ish, so I will see the good in any situation, including this late night dorm conversation where we're all sharing a little bit about where we're from. And I mentioned, where I was from. And one of the other kids in the group, without missing a beat, said, but you're not a dirty Mexican, and kept going. And it was like, and like I played it off in real time, but it stayed with me. Like I wrote about it like maybe 20 years ago, which was at least 20 years after it happened. So it's one of those moments, like even as I say it out loud right now, it's still seared in my brain how I felt in the moment that I heard it. And everybody just sort of accepted that as like, yeah, you're not a dirty Mexican, instead of challenging it. And the Laura that I am now would have challenged it. But so that was sort of that first moment. And then I've been a law professor 31 years. So it's been a minute. I teach classes that wouldn't be, well, I will just say I grew up with low income. I teach property law, business organizations, business law for startups. And it's a completely different world than the world I knew growing up. So sometimes there's surprise, like people will assume based on my name and who I am that I teach immigration law or criminal law. So there's always some surprise that like, I think embedded in that is like, well, what would you know about these topics? And then the other piece in the law professor world is, when do you see Latino names? Do I see it in business organizations like the big corporations led by Latinos? No, we see Latino names in the crim law casebooks and immigration law, and it just perpetuates this idea that you're not going to see the examples of Latinos as leaders, as successful business people, as property owners. When we see Latin names at all in our textbooks, it just perpetuates sort of the stereotypes. And I'll share more when we get to solutions and things that we can do in our daily work life to sort of to call out stereotypes. And then one thing that I think is really important to do is actually there are some things that are true about our Latino groups, and instead of treating them as a negative, let's start using those as a point of pride or a selling point. So I'll stop there and let you go on to the next one.
Right on. I'm going to take the next, I'm going to say something, take the next question, start with Pedro, Professor Padilla, and then Hema, just to reverse the order. But for me, one thing I've seen in fundraising over the years is organizations that aren't engaged in the Latino community send out a mailing because they want to diversify. They don't get a response because the Latino community doesn't know who the heck they are. And then they say, Mira, see, they're not philanthropic, those people. I've seen that about 8 or 9 times in my career internally, where there's just, this stupid S. It's just, they don't understand that, yeah, you have to ask people for things they actually know and care about, like normal human beings. You can't ask them for something just because it's important to you. So I've seen that as one way it manifests itself. So let's talk about so this problem, I looked for, before I started to think about this, I looked for other internalized racism discussions. I couldn't find any out there on the interwebs, as my daughter used to say when she was little. There isn't, it's not there. Why is this not talked about? How do we see it in our organizations and ourselves? So how do we see the problem? So let me ask Pedro first, and then Professor Padilla, then Hema, please.
I don't think we talk about it because we're raised to be ashamed of it, or that's like we don't talk about that, or we don't talk. It's I'm an openly gay Latino man, and you don't talk about you being gay. It's okay for you to be gay, my son, but let's not talk about it among families or other people. And I think when it comes to the internalized racism, we've all, I think when Dr. Professor Padilla was talking about, the grandsons being güeros. I remember being born and raised in Puerto Rico and hearing family members, oh, that woman has pelo bueno and pelo malo, like good hair and bad hair, as if there is such a thing as good hair or bad hair. And we know what they're talking about when they're talking about good hair, straight hair, as compared to curly and wavy and
There's
so,
no hair too.
or no hair, right? So, I think in the Latino culture, first of all, we were not raised to go to therapy, because if you went to therapy, you're crazy and you're weak, and they view that as a sense of weakness. And I know that because, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I know that, at times when I've had to go to counseling for my personal sanity, I know at the beginning my parents were kind of shocked, because you're such a strong, successful person, why do you need help? And it's just trying to explain to them, I just need to do the checks and balances. And so, you don't talk about that because there's shame. There's shame if someone in your family committed suicide. You don't talk about that because that's like a black thing or a bad, dark thing to talk about. So I think a lot of that, we just are raised that way, and so we internalize it, and we just keep forwarding that to the next generation and not being as open-minded as we could. And I think that really at the end ends up hurting us. I think in the fundraising world, you were talking about Latinos are not philanthropic. I think also the misconception is that I think people feel that you have to be of a certain amount of wealth to be philanthropic. A lot of people, there's been tons of stories of people, there was an African-American woman from Alabama who was a cleaning lady and left $1 million to Mississippi State College, and so, I think when you're talking about people, you can get $5 a month or $10, and that's being philanthropic. I think we get so focus on the big major gifts, and we still, as a Latino community, have the power to do major gifts. But I think just teaching people the same thing that we give, we give to church and we give to our families. How many of us have helped a niece or a cousin or someone go through college or buy their first car, or I bought my oldest niece, I bought her wedding gown as a wedding gift. And so those are things that we do that we don't necessarily think as philanthropic things. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic, but I think the internalized, a lot of it is shame. So I'll let the next person talk.
Professor Padilla, please.
It's interesting, Pedro, because I had some things I wanted to say, but as you spoke, I kind of shifted gears mentally on how I want to respond to the question. And I think one of the challenges of the many involves, communication skills, where we don't necessarily know how to raise hard topics. There's the shame, there's the guilt. We could throw in Catholicism, that not every Latino is Catholic, but a lot are. And there's that sort of guilt thing. And you don't necessarily, like Pedro, in response to the first question, you mentioned someone saying something offensive to you. And when you were offended, they were offended that you were offended. I think we overly worry about offending others or hurting others. And to have these conversations, you have to call people out. And so maybe if we can acquire sufficient communication skills to have that conversation diplomatically, to have it in a way that someone will not take it personally. Like I just think about like how hard these conversations are, not on a professional level necessarily, but with my mom. God, I'm like, oh my God, did I tell her about this webinar? Is she on? Oh shoot. But anyway, I don't think she is. So, but even having a conversation with her, she'll shut it down because it's a personal attack on her, instead of understanding it's not a personal attack. This is an honest, I want to have an honest conversation. So I think, Armando, in response to your question, acquiring the finesse to have these conversations in an honest but non-confrontational way would be really helpful.
Yeah, great. Emma, please.
Yeah, I think one of the ways, at least for me, that we tend to normalize our internal bias is really due to the oversaturation of media stereotypes, attitudes that we see of our people. We're labeled as lazy, uneducated, criminals, we're taking jobs, all we do is just produce babies. And eventually we really start to believe these narratives, and these narratives really become perpetuated in our own communities. You know, growing up, colorism is huge in our community. It was huge when I was growing up. People used to call me morena, and there was such shame associated with that term. And that term really stems from a racist white colonial ideology meant to create division between our people. So for me, if we don't start taking control of our own narratives or build our own platforms, we are going to really continue to see our people struggle. We are going to see our people believe and reflect these racist ideologies. And we're going to see our people continue to doubt their identity, their self-worth, their belonging, and their culture. And if I can say something about fundraising, you know, when you're a person of color, you are entering a space that wasn't necessarily created for you. Majority of the time, you are entering a white-dominated space where development professionals grew up in a wealthy or middle-class socioeconomic environment, and the relationship to money comes easier compared to a fundraiser who grew up low income. So in this space, we are dealing with many intersectionalities that if we are going to encourage our gente from different backgrounds to become fundraisers or leaders in the nonprofit sector for the benefit of our communities, we really need to make sure that we are creating a safe environment and programs that really represent who they are, where they come from, and the resources that they really need to secure their lives and their positions in this sector.
Oh, wonderful. Qué bueno, gracias. There's a stat I'm the person who looked it up and figured it out, and it's what Latinos can give every year, our potential for giving. So foundations give Latinx focused nonprofits about $500–600 million a year. Latinx in the US have the ability to give $24.7 billion a year. Okay, we're the 7th largest economy on the face of the earth, tied with France. $2.7 trillion annual economy in the US. So we are freaking strong. We're a powerhouse. And the messaging of, oh, you're weak, you're all poor, you're not generous, you don't care about your communities is bullshit, okay? The data says the opposite, okay? And then there's examples, you know, some of us fundraisers can tell you where our people gave when they were asked for things they understood and knew about and valued, like anybody else, they gave more than other types of Americans. So let's talk about, I do want to have plenty of time for questions because I feel like the panel's going to get a lot of good questions. But let's talk about how internalized racism specifically impacts fundraising. And I'm going to ask Gemma and Pedro to weigh in on this more, Professor Padilla, but if you have thoughts, please kick in. This is more of our area. But Gemma, talk about what you've seen in terms of IR, I call it IR now, could be IR, could be all kinds of things, you know. But how does this affect fundraising, organizing, leadership?
Yeah. When I think about that, when I think about the power that we give to our internalized oppression, we are giving power to values, structures, and belief systems that truly separate ourselves from ourselves and each other. And in my opinion, we are giving power to the wrong authority. And by giving power to the wrong authority, we are removing ourselves from the opportunity of really coming together to make a difference. Armando, you say this all the time, you know, and I actually had to look it up too, that US Latino population is the 5th largest economy in the world. And for me, that right there is the power that we need to be giving to. That is where we need to be paying attention, because that is the impact and that is the truth. And our internalized oppression is created so we don't see the value in who we are, the creativity that we bring, the voices we represent, and the contributions that we bring to this nation. So we need to really dispel these myths that we are not philanthropic because we give so much. And I think as fundraisers and as leaders in this sector, we have the beautiful pleasure and hard responsibility to really elevate our stories, uplift our strengths, and share our truths.
I'm stuck here. Pedro, please.
Yeah, someone asked the Hispanic population for largest economy, does that include all Latin America or just Hispanic people living in the US?
The fifth largest economy is the GDP inside the United States of Latinos.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think how it affects, it's interesting how it affects Latinx fundraising. I'll give you two examples of things that I've encountered in my career of fundraising. One of them is when it comes to planned giving, which are deferred gifts. I did an article about a planned giving at my previous job, and I did not get a response from anybody. And when I went to ask for feedback, I think people are under the impression that they feel that to leave a legacy gift, you have to be a millionaire or you have to be rich, and it's just leaving a percentage of your estate. You can leave whether it's $500. So I think you're just like, you immediately exclude yourself. Oh, well, I don't fall into that category, so I'm not going to do a planned gift to my alma mater or to the organization that helped me, be the person that I am today. Whether it's like the Big Boys Little Boys program or the Boys and Girls Club or whatever. We never really think about that. And then the other one is I've been helping a Latino organization of very well-to-do Latino professionals talk about fundraising. And I think some of the feedback I've gotten from some of my friends who perhaps have been self-made, that fear of losing everything is they feel like it's hard for us to give this money away because we work so hard for it. And I'm just like, I'm not asking you to give it all away. I'm just asking you to empower the next generation. Because as I say to them, if we as Latinos do not help the next generation become future lawyers or future fundraisers or future professionals, no one else is going to help us. I mean, that's the bottom line. And we had to have this conversation because we were talking about how is it that we have over 50,000 members and we can't raise a dime. And I'm just like, first of all, because you're macetas or stingy, as I call them in Puerto Rico. But it's really just trying to teach about the power of little gifts that impact the community. And it's not, so I think part of it is like I don't make enough money to give. The other ones, it's a planned gift and only wealthy people do trust and estates wills. Everybody should have a will, no matter what kind of social economic class you are, because you have something to leave behind, or at least you want to leave your last wishes be known to the rest of your family. So I think we self-exclude ourselves just by, I don't make enough money or I don't fall into that category. And that comes with the internalized racism that we're raised that we're not worthy enough or we're not good enough or we not, or haven't seen it in your family, or that's only things that wealthy white people do. We don't do that. And even when we say those things, we have to listen to ourselves because we are putting ourselves down even though we're successful people. And it's like we take a beating from the regular, world on a regular basis. Why are we beating ourselves? You don't really see, for the most part, a white Anglo person beating themselves up for not being able to give or not give. So I think sometimes we're our worst enemies and we exclude ourselves without even knowing it from the get-go. So
yeah. Well, let's I'm gonna ask one more question, then we're gonna open it up, folks, for questions. So be ready.
Can I throw in two
let's
things,
talk.
Armando, can I just
Please,
throw in two
please.
really, even though I'm not a professional fundraiser, there are a couple thoughts based on what you've said. And one of them involves financial literacy, or this notion that you need to be rich. And I get that, because I certainly believe that for a long time. Like, why would I give? I'm not rich. I'm not falling into this category. And so this is one where there's like this blurry line between internalized oppression, like believing negative stereotypes, and having some stereotypes. And most stereotypes have some truth to them. And for a lot of us, we didn't grow up with financial mentoring or guidance. And so having a piece of that is I think vitally important. And then maybe some of the training, something that I think you might have said, Pedro, is that we already give in ways that we don't recognize as philanthropy. So I think if we share with our community that, look, you guys, we're already giving, like among Latinos, I'm going to make this, it's a stereotype, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. We help our families all the time. How many live in like multi-generational households? It's very normal in our world. Our tios, our tias, like everyone's either a primo or a tio or a tia. Maybe not if you took a traditional family tree, but for me, my grandma's from a family of 12. Everyone is either a tio, tia, or cousin, even if they're not first cousins. And the way that not just that we're willing to, it's a privilege to have multiple generations under one roof. That's a form of philanthropy. the way that you provide that wedding dress, or that I make sure that, like, I don't know, I have a niece that needs help with her summer camps. I'm going to very quietly make sure those things happen. So we're doing those on the regular. And so maybe we can pivot the way we think about philanthropy and broaden it. And so that people that are reluctant to jump into to giving, you're already doing it. This is nothing new, but if you want to broaden the impact you can have in our community. And so, sort of shifting our mindset away from like, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that, to no, you're already doing it. And it's a beautiful thing, and you could do it even more expansively and have a bigger reach and a bigger touch.
And I want to say when you say that, and we should celebrate that. We should not. I mean, I've been in situations where people are like, we ourselves frown upon the people of Latinos that give. Oh, this person gave, and because they think they have, or they, and it's like we should be celebrating the fact that we have people that want to actually give and instill that into our own personal culture. And so it's sometimes like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So, and I think we're really good at doing that ourselves within our own community.
Yeah. Right on, guys. Let's talk about and Professor Padilla, I'd like you to lead this one, and then we'll go to Pedro and Hema. How do we break this? How do we? I mean, at Somos, you guys know we're not about crying about the Polynesian Chillones. We want to take this on and tackle it. We're about solutions. That's it. We teach fundraising. We don't talk about philanthropy. We teach fundraising. Okay, we're doing it. And so, how do we challenge this? Well, Professor Padilla, you're better at this. Talk about how we challenge this in the different layers.
Well, there are so many layers, and honestly, like everybody here, and even the chat, I'm not as good as I am a boomer, so I'm not as good at multitasking as I used to be. But when I see the comments in the chat, it's like everybody I can tell has thoughts and ideas, and I'm excited for us to be able to share these. But you're right, Armando. It's a very multi-layered, multifaceted, complex problem to solve. We're talking about we can control the internalized part. It's a little harder, the external, the oppressive behavior. We have to be working on that too. But there are a lot of different groups working on reducing the discriminatory and subordinating behavior. And this job is never done. Sorry for anyone who's from Florida, but the whole cancel culture and getting rid of multicultural studies and that sort of thing. It's like, are you like, we're fighting this fight and it's 2023, really? So I mean, that work is never done. There's a lot of work to be done to minimize, eradicate, mitigate the oppressive behavior from the external forces. And that's multiple webinars. Internally, we need to continue like these conversations. Thank you for organizing this webinar, because this is a starting point. You're right. This conversation doesn't happen enough. We're having it and thinking about those communication tools. How can we have the honest conversations, being mindful of not offending somebody, but still being able to call on things, call on the negative stereotypes and challenge them, but in a respectful way. So, those are certainly starting points. And I'm curious to hear from other panelists. And then as we open it up, thoughts people have about moving forward and reducing the harmful impact of internalizing negative stereotypes about ourselves.
Wonderful. Cool. Oh, please.
There's two questions on the question and answer. I don't know if you have access to that, Armando. We might want to address those.
Okay.
The first one is, I just had an incident with a really good friend that made me realize that she was comparing herself with me and thought that she was superior than me because of her skin color. Now that I'm aware of her thinking, I'm so disgusted, but it's making me feel a certain way about her. Any recommendations on what should I do to work on myself with this shocking discovery?
Who wants to take that question?
Professor, I'm going to defer to you.
Well, honestly, I mean, this is a conversation. Oops, am I muted? No. Okay.
Nope.
It's a conversation. Like I said, I've heard my mother and her girlfriends have, my grandmother before that, God bless her, may she rest in peace. But I think part of it is sort of calling it out, but it doesn't have to be confrontational. Younger me probably would have been confrontational I'm a grandma now. I'm like so much more chill than I was when I was younger. But it doesn't mean I roll over when I hear things like that. It can be that the gent, they're like, I'm sorry, like, I think I'm misunderstanding you. I think what I'm hearing you say is this, but that couldn't be. So tell me what you're thinking, and sort of have the conversation, but it has to be authentic to whoever you are, right? So we can't give like a one size fits all. This is how the conversation goes. But I think it has to be sort of honest and authentic to who you are, but being mindful that you don't want to shut down the conversation. You actually want to have the conversation. So how can you proceed in a respectful but honest way to call them out? Because honestly, like if they think they're superior because of their skin color, at the end of the day, there might not be anything that you can do to fix that, because that's really their issue, not yours, but you can at least challenge it. And they might, here's the other piece. Maybe they don't even know that they're saying that. Is it subconscious? Is it intentional? So there's so much to unpack in there, but I would start with that.
And I will add to that, that as you grow older, you learn to let go of people like that and realize that, your friends become a smaller circle of friends as you get older, because you don't need that kind of affirmation or beating from people that you consider friends. So that's food for thought. The other question from Elisa Gonzalez is, how does our internalized oppression limit our ability to support one another, survive the nonprofit industrial complex and philanthropy?
Let me start by answering that myself a little bit.
Yeah.
I just want to say we need to shatter barriers, and we need to also recognize that there's an extra layer with our mujeres, okay? Because not only are they looked at because they're morena, but they're also looked at because they're women. So we have our own misogyny, we have our own bullshit internally. So we got to look at that extra layer. But to support each other, we need to ask ourselves the filters we're looking at each other with, and stop creating separation, and stop creating a reason not to. That's super important. Because I have seen powerful Latina women leaders undermined by other women because of son celosa or whatever, and so that's really intensely angering to me to see successful leaders undermined. And I really want, leaders are just people. We screw up. I've been a leader most of my career. And so we got to watch that. So that's my opinion. I'm going to shut up. And please, who else wants to kick in on this?
Yeah, I would also say, just from my experience in being in fundraising spaces where majority of it is white dominating, and even the leadership models that we tend to refer to are mostly coming from a really colonial framework. So I think one of the biggest responsibilities and challenges that we have as a community and people coming into this sector is how do we challenge these models, and how do we remove ourselves from our conditioning, because we have to exist in these models, and then at the same time we have to make sure that we do not become these models and create our own. So I think right now I'm currently navigating that space and how to survive the nonprofit industrial complex and philanthropy. But I think one of the very first things is to recognize that just by being in this panel, by being in community right now, we are doing it. We are asking the questions of what's really necessary. And I think everyone on this call, as leaders in the community and in the fundraising space, that is going to be our biggest challenge, in really coming together and learn how to navigate these spaces and creating a container of a safe space of really calling out our internal biases and really challenge ourselves, because this is not only going to it's not only going to be a challenge externally, but it's also on a spiritual level, emotional level, a physical level, a mental level. We are going up with parts of ourselves and a system that we might not necessarily have ever been at war with. So we really need to be really mindful, and it's really hard because sometimes, you know, I'm from 16th of Valencia in San Francisco. Sometimes I can get a certain way, but I have to realize that you know, there's a different way and how to communicate and how to channel that. And I think that's going to be the biggest question for us. Can we remove ourselves from this conditioning, and what does that look like? Because most importantly, if we're going to be in this sector and in this space, because I do think it's important, we need to make sure if that we are the vanguards or we are the people leading this, we need to make sure we are creating safe spaces for, you know, the future generations to come, to make sure that they are okay here.
Yeah, wonderful. I want to lift up Sandra, has a great question here, which goes to the last question we were going to ask, and it's better said. Thank you, Sandra. And so it's, how do you deal with passive racism in your workplace? Passive racism. How do you address certain comments or assumptions about being Latina from coworkers, especially fellow BIPOC folks? Who wants to get that one?
Wait, can you repeat that? I didn't hear that for a second. I'm sorry.
No. Okay, how do you deal with passive racism in your workplace? How do you address certain comments or assumptions about being Latina from coworkers, especially fellow BIPOC folks?
I mean,
Wow.
I can say from the perspective of a Latino, not Latina, but I mean, I think going back to what Professor Padilla says, I think sometimes you have to be, when I've been situations where people have said something and I'm like, wait, did I hear what you really meant to tell me? And kind of, you know, I think sometimes a lot of these things, to be honest with you, have to nip it in the bud and just, you know, show that you need to be respected from the get-go, but make it in a way that you're like, did I hear you say this right? Or maybe sometimes, you know, if some people have said things to me, I'm like, let me just educate you on something, or let's talk about this, and in a way that it's a non-threatening, correcting. But I mean, at some point, you know, sometimes these conversations are not easy, and sometimes you have to be like, this is the way it is, and I'm offended, and you shouldn't say that. And it's happened to me as being a gay Latino person in a community that I'm light skinned, or my parents paid for my college, and you know, you feel like, I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud that my parents were able to do. Isn't that what we all eventually are striving for, that our next generation does better and does better? So why are you frowning upon the fact that my parents worked hard to provide me a better life? And so sometimes you have to just, you know, be honest and talk about it. And with Latina women, I have to say, I've seen it, and it gets fierce. So I'll defer to my women Latina panel speakers to address that.
So I'm going to refer everyone to a couple of books, Presumed Incompetent and then Presumed Incompetent 2, that talk about presumptions of incompetence. And it focuses on women of color in the academy, but just sort of this presumption of incompetence that was alluded to earlier, not with that phrase, but this idea that, and in fact, Armando, no pressure, but I feel like we all need SL, Super Latino, Super Latina t-shirts or capes that we need to wear, because you have to work twice as hard, you have to be twice as good, your mistakes are magnified, right? And so Presumed Incompetent really sort of talks about the presumptions of incompetence we start with, and we have to prove ourselves to be competent. And so then a couple of ways, you know, maybe these are a little bit manipulative, but I'm going to put them out anyway. So when I started teaching, I mentioned it's 31 years down the road. So at this point, I'm in a different place than when I first started. But when I started, I was young. I was still Latina. I was, still a Latina female, and I'm petite. I used to have a soft voice until I got my COVID vaccine. Then my voice dropped and it got gravelly. I don't know what happened, but I used to be petite, soft voice, Latina. And I knew that I had been warned by colleagues that I would be challenged in the classroom. So I would always start off just sprinkling in all this sort of self props, at Stanford this, or on the Stanford board, we talk about this. And I didn't, I don't like to be that person, but I kind of felt like, let's just nip, it's a preemptive offensive move where it's just like, I'm going to make it very clear that I belong. Here's my credentials. I'm going to lay them out. I'm not going to list them on the board, but I'm going to interweave them before you even have an opportunity to challenge me. So there's that thing of sort of preemptive, laying out your credentials in advance. But then sometimes it doesn't work and you get this sort of passive, or maybe it's passive racism, maybe it's unconscious. Regardless, there are ways to call it, and different situations call for different responses. Sometimes I play dumb, and I'll, because that's a little less aggressive. And like, oh my gosh, I don't like, what do you mean by that? Like, I haven't heard that before, no, just something. And it gives them an opportunity to sort of backpedal or certainly think about what they've said. But there are other times like, oh shoot, I almost said like, we're being recorded. Like, F that. I'm not going to say the whole word, but like, that's bullshit. I don't mind saying that. Like, we're like, oh, that's bullshit. I don't know where you're coming from with that. But sort of different things that people say necessitate different responses. Because like if it's overt and they're meaning it, then I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive. But if I think that maybe it's passive or maybe it's unconscious, I'll sort of give them a chance to explain it. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the ways that's been helpful is really creating like coping strategies for yourself. Just because, you know, while you are in this sector, you are dealing with different intersectionalities, you know, class, gender, sexism, and then let alone the internal struggles that we are personally going through. And, you know, with that, I would say one of the best methods that has worked for me is to not respond immediately. To just kind of, for me, take a sit back and just realize what's going on, especially when if it's first happened to you or you're first experiencing it, because it kind of comes out of shock. And just realize that it doesn't really have anything to do with you. And it's more so about the work that still needs to be done. And most importantly is just, in this sector, you're going to be met with a lot of confrontation from, you know, non-people of color and people of color, you know, so you do have to prepare yourself and equip yourself with tools that can really prepare you for these really tough conversations. And that's something that I really had to do, because I really had to check my emotions. I had to make sure that I'm coming in professionally, because this industry and this sector, and more so people, can test you. So I will say the best thing to do is really create coping strategies for yourself, and do it. Don't do it for other people, but create ones that really work for you and allow you to reflect and then respond. I would say that's what's been helpful to me.
Awesome. I want to kick in here. You know, for me, data is my sword. So when people say, oh, you know, I was at a major health organization years ago, and my boss was like, we can't ask Latinos for money. They're struggling. This is what he told me. And I said, you know, there's Latino billionaires in the Bay Area, 5. And he was like, no. So here they are. So that's a fact, you know? So that's like, shut the bleep up, right? Because you don't know your data. Most people don't know that. That's why I put up Latino Donor Collaborative, because if you look at their data, it's jaw-dropping, okay? And our data, the fact is that the #1 opener of new businesses in the United States of America is a Latina, okay? Not an old white man, a Latina, okay? So we are a powerhouse. We're not lazy people. We're innovative and strong. And when we realize that, nothing can stop us, okay? So that's the bottom line, is have your data for your community, understand the wealth, and do your prospect research in your community. I want to give time to anybody else. We got a couple more minutes who wants to make another statement, or I just kind of did, you know, so just grabbing a microphone, you know, please, anybody else want to add something in here?
Yeah, I think this was a really great conversation, Armando. I think this is one, hopefully first of many, maybe create a series for Somos el Poder, just by going with, just looking at the chat, you know, there can be tons and tons of conversations and topics. And I think, yeah, this is just the first. And I really look forward to, really creating a container for our people and really talking about our internal bias and how we can really channel that into creative collective work.
Gracias.
And I will just say it has been a privilege to spend the past hour, not just with the three panelists and Armando, the organizer, but for each of you who have participated and doing my best to keep up with chat. There have been great comments, and this is really a fabulous community, and I do feel privileged to be a part of it. Thank you.
And I'll echo that as well. And I think, and this issue becomes even more complicated as we talk about multi-generation, because I think in this panel we have baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Z, and I'm sure there's people from every generation. So I think, each of us have had our own journey and experience when it comes to racism and internal racism based on the generation that we're with. And I'm just glad that we've had the conversation. It's just a conversation we should have had a long time ago. This is not voodoo. This is not anything bad or something that we should be ashamed of. So I thank Armando and Somos el Poder, and I'm proud to say that I'm a board member, and I think we're on to bigger and better things. And thanks everybody for coming and taking 50 minutes of your time to discuss a uncomfortable subject matter that's very important to our comunidad. Thank you.
And I am going to say, Hema is exactly right. You're reading my mind. We are going to do this as a series. We're going to do this on a regular biannual basis, because I thought this would be popular, but not this popular. So it's something we need to lift up, and we will ask your guys' advice and bring you some back. Pero gracias por todo. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Check out the upcoming Somos webinars. There'll be 2 more scheduled very soon. We do twice a month. And this is another one, and if you have ideas of what you'll be talking about, West Deering, okay?
And I'll say one more thing. All of us, you should look each other up in LinkedIn. We should connect through LinkedIn, because that's empowering force that we can, as united through LinkedIn, we can do more. So check us out all in LinkedIn. Have a good day,
folks. As we always say, siempre adelante.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Adios. Bye, everyone.